Well, it's nearly summer, and that means that a lot of you will be going off on holiday. And of course, that leads to worries these days about data and your phone. Nobody wants to be stuck with an enormous bill once they get back. And our sponsors, NordVPN, have got a product that might help you. It's called Saily. It's an affordable eSIM data for international travel. You get a data plan from the Saily eSIM app and go online wherever you are. So you can say goodbye to patchy Wi-Fi and high roaming fees. You'll save a lot of money, which is obviously good, but it's also safe and secure internet. There's no more dodgy public Wi-Fi when you're abroad. There's built-in cybersecurity features as well, web protection, ad blocker, and instant access on your arrival. So to go there without any worries and be in contact with whoever you need to be, hopefully see some Rangers signings in the summer, then get this. And you can do so if you download Saily in your app store or by scanning the QR code on screen. Use code Heart in Hand at checkout to get 15% off your first purchase. The details are in the podcast episode description box. Hello everyone and welcome to Heart in Hand, the Rangers podcast. My name is David Edgar and as always I am your host, and that's the season over. A mixture of frustration and relief, I think, being felt by most Rangers fans about what was, let's be honest, a fairly pitiful campaign. In the end up, joining me to discuss it today is David Graham. Hello Davey.
Good afternoon, David. Good afternoon, listeners. It is in many ways a pleasure to be here to confine this season to the dustbin of history, never to be spoken about again. And God help whoever has to cover this in later years in the pod. It certainly will not be me.
Well, we have to cover it in the season review later in the summer, but that won't be particularly pleasant. I'm tempted to just go, look, there's a year's worth of podcasts there, for you to go and catch up in the season if you weren't reminded of it. But professionalism will come to the fore there. Look, as I say, we'll go through it all in another show. But today, there's a couple of things, really. The main one was a fairly meaningless fixture against Falkirk at the weekend. Rangers winning 5-2 because the pressure was off, David, and they're a good side when the pressure's off. The only thing is that's a bit of a problem for a side that is expected to go and compete for titles. But the other thing, the big thing, is Andrew Cavenagh meeting with the press and announcing that Danny Rule is staying, that he backs Danny Rule, that the club backed Danny Rule. Their feeling, clearly, David, is that it's the wrong squad. The mentality isn't there. They mentioned words like mentality, leadership, footballing IQ, the ability to play in a pressurised environment like Rangers, that's going to be the key to the recruitment. And several times referred to a new squad, a revamped squad. These were some of the terms that he used, and feels that there is an underlying issue at Rangers, which is why managers come in, fail, move on. And there are all sorts of arguments, which we'll discuss, about, is that right? Is it a case that it simply was just the players and no coach could succeed if he doesn't have the right squad? Or is it a case of you haven't had the right coach? Well, we're going to find out one way or another, because with that backing and with what you would hope is a transformational summer in terms of signing the players with the requisite qualities that we lack, then Danny Rule's pretty much going to get everything that could be reasonably expected for a manager to go and succeed with.
Yeah, well, look, I think on the game, probably in the words of our former player and now a manager, Reno Gattuso, kind of the Falkirk game kind of summed up, sometimes good, sometimes shit, which is sort of in many ways our season, really, if we're honest. In terms of, look, to be fair to the owners, they've come out and said, right, well, we're keeping Danny Rule, which actually was a very smart play in terms of kind of the PR side, because it has then kind of closed the door in speculation around, well, if Rule goes, who's his successor, etc., etc. I have no evidence based on, has there been conversations around the back with various potential suitors, and they've said, no, or maybe, or not right now. It's zero, so there's no point speculating on that. What I would say is that, cards on the table, I remain to be convinced that Danny Rowell is the right man for the job. I'm basing that on every time pressure came on. I think, yes, the team and the squad crumbled, but I think so did he as well. I think there are big question marks around, his style of play, question marks around his selection of the starting 11, question marks around then his kind of erratic use of subs. And then I think, and again, we'll probably have a slight discussion on the kind of the James Tavernier exit, but again, wider discussions around his management. So probably in a way we sum up, and I'll kind of try to flow this through to the next bit, where he could be an unbelievable coach on the grass. He could be carrying out some world-class training sessions. He could even be a master tactician, but if he is unable, or sorry, if he is being asked to manage the wider group because there isn't anyone else around that to kind of take pressure off or provide a focus and a leadership, then that is putting him, in my view, in an invidious position. But one thing I will say is, and look, it's not for me to kind of beat the drum in any way, but if the owners said, look, we're sticking with Danny Rowell, if the owners are saying, look, we're going to put our hands in our pockets, then we have no choice but to back the ownership and the current manager. And ultimately, regardless of what we think of any of the people who've been in our dugout over the last 10, 15 years, I don't think that the supporters can ever be accused of not giving anything but an unrelenting, unquestioned support. So look, ultimately, proof of the pudding's in the eating. It's now over to Danny Rowell and the wider owners. And I think, and again, David, you'll probably want to elaborate on this, I think finally at this stage there are legitimate question marks around an evaluation. There's probably a pod in itself to say, look, where exactly on and off the field have we improved and developed under the new owners? They have clearly put their money where their mouth is. There are clearly, mentality issues, which is impacting all parts of the club, not just the starting 11. But there is a massive summer. I think the frustration as a supporter, like I'm sure all listeners will be, we've had a massive summer for probably the guts of the last 10 summers, if not, maybe more. And I think very much lastly at this stage, David, we all fear watching the movie again. We all fear a challenging and inconsistent July and August, going away to Parkhead, going away to Tynecastle, and I think we all fear come Halloween we're back in the speculation of, well, who's replacing Danny Rowell for the annual sort of managerial merry-go-round. So sorry to kind of go off on a tangent, but I think, in a nutshell, we've all got to do better. They've all got to do better. And, over to you now, gents.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, look, there's no getting away from the fact that this season has been a disaster. We were third, for Christ's sake. Right? Cup semi-final, cup quarter-final. I mean, it's a piss-poor season, bottom of the Europa League group stage. And that's the reality. No point trying to dress it up. Now, Andrew Cavenagh accepted that yesterday, didn't shy away from it. He speaks very well, which you would expect with a man of his background. He is a very, very good communicator, and he communicates very well. But as he said himself, talk is cheap. I mean, he literally said that. Talk is cheap. It's about actions. It's about making things happen. And I think that, therefore, as fans, you can take the words any way you want them to, whether it encourages you, whether it doesn't. But the reality is that Rangers need to improve on the pitch, first and foremost, before really anything else can get done. And I think, he knows that. It's not about knowing it, though, is it? It's about, well, I suppose that's the first step. You can't solve problems if you don't think you've got one. But it's about, do you then have the ability to go and change things and make things better? And that's what we'll need to see in the summer. I think it's the wrong move keeping Danny Rowell. I've told him that. So, I won't be able to hide if in a year's time we're a massive success, he'll be able to come and say to me, I was right, you were wrong. I'll be too busy partying right enough to care. But and I sincerely hope that conversation has to take place. But it was, communicated, it was asked, this fear Rangers fans have, that this cycle of disappointing end to season, manager stays, get off to a bad start, he's sacked, you're hunting for a new manager. And he said, we're aware of that, they're not blind, they don't think that the fans really back Danny Rose, they're not living in a bubble, but they feel that there are deeper issues which are behind this cycle, and that they need to break it in a different way. You could argue that breaking the cycle would be to get rid of the manager now and have a fresh start. Equally, I think it was Adam that said, well, yeah, we could do that. We could bring in a new manager. And if he loses 4 of the opening 5 games next season, he might be gone by October anyway, which is fair. But I think that Danny Rose got a lot of pressure on his shoulders going into new season and expectations. But I'm pretty sure, as you mentioned there, they're going to put their hands in their pockets. I think you will see a lot of change, a lot of ins, and maybe as importantly, a lot of outs at Rangers in the summer. I think they are looking at a different type of player. He mentioned that Rangers are no going to longer be as interested in signing what he described as pure raw talent, i.e., the stats all say this guy's going to be brilliant, and more about, okay, well, what's he like? What can we physically see from him on the park? What's he like as a leader? All of these kind of things, which we told him a year ago.
Sorry to interrupt, Davey. Can we have an example of the raw talent that we've signed recently? Just, I know I'm sort of tongue-in-cheek.
I think Chermiti would be the poster boy for that, where you sign somebody and you look at his back story and you go, really? Wow, that's a lot of money for somebody that's barely played. And he comes in and at first you think, wow, I don't see it at all. But he gets better as the season goes on. And he's still not the finished product yet, David, but I think most people would admit that there's definitely talent there. I think there's a decision to move away from that and go for more experienced players, although you still get younger players come in, and clubs always talk about it. They don't sign 10 types of the one player. Well, Chelsea do, and it doesn't work for them, but everybody else tends to try and go for a mixture of players. I think there might be less focus this summer on things like resale value and more about what they can do when they get on the park. But again, that's me taking that from his words. He didn't explicitly say it.
David, can I ask, and again, listeners, I'm going to caveat this by saying, please don't feel in any way I am being overly negative this afternoon, or I am in any way kind of trying to just sort of find ways to sort of, jab away at Mr. Cavenagh and co. It's far from it. I think one of the questions I had, and I don't know whether it was asked by you or any other members of the pack yesterday morning, but I suppose if you look back, we spent the most out of all clubs. I think you could probably argue we spent more on Chermiti than Hearts spent on their entire window. I think, what are we looking at? The guts of 50 million across 2 windows. Is that a fair enough figure?
I think 40. But roughly, yeah.
Well, I suppose what I'm doing is you will have to have had an increase there in terms of the weekly wage budget, and there will be sort of significant enough agents' fees in there. But anyway, the figure's kind of neither here nor there in a way. Where my sort of wider concern is, and this is the question that I would be kind of asking, is to say, well, obviously Kevin Thelwell moved on, but from my understanding, a lot of the other sort of same generals are still there. Your Dan Purdy's, your Thelwell Juniors. I suppose really the question is, right, well, we recruited inconsistently last summer, let's say, and those that look like they can offer something, whether that be Nadiri, Chikawani, Tur Romans, they have struggled probably physically to get up to the pace of the game, which is understandable. They're January signings, and it's a common thread. Really, I suppose the wider issue I've got, if we're basically backing Danny Rose, okay, that's fine. You can agree, disagree, or sort of sit on the fence. I suppose the wider issue is actually around the infrastructure of the club, David, and the culture then that is being instilled. Because I suppose in my experience is that actually, it's a 24/7 job. It's about kind of everyone pulling in the one direction. And really, maybe Jim Gillespie's the answer to this question, but who is the sort of the forefront and the leader who is actually pulling everyone in that direction? Because it ain't Danny Rose, not even because of his age, not because of his personality, But I think that there needs to be a wider holistic view at the entire infrastructure rather than simply, okay, Danny, we're going to spend a load of money, win us the league, pal.
Yeah, exactly. And these are all questions that can't be answered in statement. It's something that is likely to. It's something that's likely to only be proven on the park. Because we can all have an opinion on it, but they're just that. They're just words at the moment. What we do know as a fact is that Rangers got last season wrong. That's just the outputs, the end results tell you that. And they need to make sure that they're doing things better, smarter, differently in this summer. Otherwise, you'll just repeat. I think in terms of, he was asked about that incidentally, about, well, what's the system for getting in players? What's the structure? And he said that it's going to be the same as it was in January, where the guys you mentioned are involved. Danny Rule is involved in it. The scouting guys are involved in it. He's involved in it before a decision is made on a player coming in. But yeah, look, there's no point us talking about what might come in the summer. He's told us what he feels we're lacking. I think we would all agree we're lacking those things. And he's going to, obviously, he's going to hopefully change that. But we won't be able to tell. We won't even be able to tell, by the way, when we come back to do a show in August and the players are in the door. Because if there's one thing I think I've learned over the last few years, you can be excited about a player coming in and it can be a disaster. Scott Olsen. Other players you might not have big expectations of and they do really well. So you can't tell after a month or whatever. You can't even tell. You need to get later in the season before you begin to realise what a player is or isn't bringing to the club. And as I say, we can, debate that. But the fact is that what Rangers did last summer clearly did not work. And what they need to do this summer is a lot better. You mentioned James Tavernier there. He spoke about James Tavernier, spoke about the situation, said it wasn't a good look for anyone involved in it. And that he praised Tav, legend of the club, but said the phrase, David, if you're asked to pull on a Rangers jersey, you pull on a Rangers jersey, no questions asked, which I thought was pretty telling. And my view on the whole situation is that a manager in any business, you need to foresee problems before they arrive. And you work out what's the benefit of doing this and what are the the possible negatives of doing this. Those are the things you need to do before you come to a decision. And for Danny Rule, having analysed it, he should have just played James Tavernier because the potential for a black eye was there. And of course it happened. And therefore, given it was a dead rubber, which Rangers lost anyway, and they end up, then he should just have done it. And maybe felt, to be honest, that's not what I wanted to do, but given the circumstances, I'll just do it. Tav handled it really badly as well. I'm sure he's got his regrets there, and he should, because he cut his nose off to spite his face, which I'm never a fan of doing. I get, obviously, it was emotional for him, but I'm sure down the line he'll regret that action. And in the end, nobody came out of looking well. The club came out of looking poor. Rule came out of looking poor. Tav came out of looking poor. And it was just a lose-lose situation. And I think you've got to, in any workplace, that's the absolute worst outcome. You've got to avoid that. And that's what Rangers stumbled into. And it became almost a microcosm of the season.
Yeah, look, I think, David, one lesson I probably was taught pretty early in my political days, and it probably applies to everything in life, really. If you're going to pick a fight or you're faced with a fight, make sure you're going to win. And if you're not going to win, lose with pride and dignity. And I think that really in many ways, no one come out of this squeaky clean. Not James Tavernier, not Danny Rule, not the club, not anyone. It was an unedifying situation, which
yes, it was,
could have been avoided through probably better internal communication. And I'm not going to blame anyone, any person, he or she. It's a case of, look, everyone kind of has to evaluate and be self-reflective. And I think, including Mr. Cavenagh, to say, well, actually, why did these situations happen and why do these situations happen? I think, as you say, it kind of just summed up and epitomised our season, which was us kind of just stumbling in the kind of, almost sort of big, deep, dark holes that actually we'd really dug for ourselves. I suppose, in fairness to Tav, he's clearly tried to explain the emotional side of things in his parting statement. I think I can understand the kind of wider issues of which, like, he's tried to explain. I think that there are clearly wider issues where, it's a big kind of, tabloid-esque headline to say Rules lost the dressing room, but certainly it would appear, as outsiders looking in, that the players and the squad have backed the manager. My understanding is there was a presentation at the training ground yesterday and Danny Rule wasn't there. I don't think, there are people saying, Rule was told to stay away and various things. Look, obviously, that's happened. I think we all have to look at Tav's legacy, which is, whether you want to look at it as glass half empty or glass half full, James Tavernier single-handedly at times carried us through various difficult situations. Through really at times no fault of his own, he became the poster boy for failure, which wasn't helped by members within the media, I think specifically targeting him. An extremely talented footballer who I think has brought us all, listeners, some of the best moments in not only the last 10 years, some of the best moments and as Rangers supporters. But I think really in a way, clearly Mr. Kavanagh's kind of planted his flag in the ground and has kind of drawn a line. And I think ultimately it's now in the past. I don't think it's something that we should be holding against anyone. I think that we should all kind of dust ourselves off and learn from it. But I think the final point I'll make, that it is really not, I think we all kind of fell below kind of the standards expected. I think certainly.
I don't think we did as fans, Davey.
No,
We were
no,
the ones
sorry,
left
sorry,
standing
sorry.
watching
Yeah.
battle.
Oh no, sorry, exactly. Sorry, no, forgive me. No, I think what I'm saying is, as a club, it was a situation where we've had a really difficult year. We've had two managers, one of who was a complete disaster, and one who, depending how you look statistically, has had some really difficult moments as well. So really, in a way, everyone's just trying to sort of hold their breath to get through the season. And as you say, hindsight's a wonderful thing, but we chose to go down this path, or Danny Rule chose, or we ended up down this path, whoever we got there. And as you say, we ended up losing another game, 4 in the bounce, first time since the 80s. And really, in a way, like this season, but particularly this incident, it should be, essentially stuck into the dustbin of history, the door slammed very firmly, or the lid slammed very firmly shut, and let's all move on. And I think my final point in James Tavernier's, let's remember the good times, the great times, and the fact that I've said this numerous times in the pod, and I'll say again, James Tavernier is going to be much, much more difficult to replace than anyone likes to admit right now.
No, it's absolutely true. But the issue, I think, is that we've needed to replace James Tavernier, the player, for 2 years. The person has been there, but the player wasn't. He was no longer the guy that he'd once been. So that almost has been glaring, but for a while now, as can happen with senior players when they come to the end of it. It was just unedifying's the word, just sad. And as a fan, you're just sitting there going, for fuck's sake, more pish when you really don't need it. And yeah, like, people can pick a side. Me personally, I'm just, maybe it just says where I am with it at the end of the season. I'm just like, the people I feel bad about or feel sorry for are us, the supporters. Do you know what I mean? Squabbles between these highly paid guys that have delivered this season. I struggle to work up a lot of sympathy towards either camp at the moment. Maybe that'll change in time. But like you, I tend to think it's been and it's done now. If Rule's staying, he needs to learn from it and we move on. So David, season ended, I say. We'll go into it in more detail in shows throughout the summer. Rangers, as you mentioned earlier, putting their flag out for what they're going to do in the summer, going to do new things. And the one sort of question then that for this episode is, We knew how the league campaign between Hearts and Celtic was going to go. Of course, it did. We had more scenes at the weekend of a pitch invasion, a game that ended without a final whistle. And it's been quite interesting, though, to watch the wider world of football, who were paying attention to Scottish football. And the credit for that is with Hearts, incidentally, no matter how much anybody would like to say. It was Hearts that got it there. And stuff we've been complaining about for a number of years, which is that everything goes for Celtic up here, and it is structured in a way that should happen, has been noticed out with the wider world. What's your take on the events of the last week and any potential ramifications?
Well, yes, if anyone wants to listen to BBC Radio Ulster this morning about 10:10, I was warming up for this particular pod, getting a few things off my chest. I think, I was actually thinking when I look back, this time 5 years ago, we had just won our 55th league title. It probably should have been and it was some of the best days of my life, but it was also arguably some of the most challenging. Let's not make any mistake about it. The First Minister basically ran a propaganda campaign against us based on a doctored video by a Twitter account called Wooly Wanker, which is a fact and in itself is actually laughable. We had members of the media, we had former players, we had elected members of parliament and other things. We had previously elected members. Basically, anyone who had any sort of a grudge or opportunity to have a dig at us did. We were roundly criticised by the political classes, were roundly criticised by the police, everyone and anyone for basically the behaviour of our fans. Let's not make any mistake about it. Glasgow City Centre for coincides with any Celtic victory was destroyed on Saturday night. There are 2 police officers in hospital because of serious injuries. The wider football world now has seen the challenges of which we have faced, and not just we as in Rangers, but I think the wider football family, if you want to call it that. And I mean, there's no doubt if I was a Hearts fan, I'd have clear gripes with missed penalties and penalties that were given, etc., etc.
Well, that is what cost them the title. Those 2 penalties.
100%. I mean, that's a categorical fact. What we've got here, though, is this is again, though, Rangers fans and people like you and I, Davey, are, oh, look at them, they're paranoid. Yeah, it's everyone else's fault. We are not by any stretch, playing the victim card. In fact, if anything, the people who have caused all sorts of menace and melee over the last number of months by invading pitches seem in the same way to be able to both be perpetrator and victim at the same time, which is actually quite, from a gymnastics point of view, it is, Olympic levels of flexibility. I mean, this brings back again, though, I think the focus where I think the American owners will have actually realised we ain't playing on a level playing field here. I mean, I've worked in football and I've worked in politics, and football, particularly in Scotland, is much more political than politics is. And I know that sounds somewhat strange, but, we have tried as a club to manoeuvre Mr. Doncaster out of his position for years. And quite frankly, a nuclear bomb could be set off at Hampden, and I still believe he would be sitting behind his desk when the dust would settle. And really, in a way now, until there is a clear and concerted effort to try to revolutionise, and I do use the word revolutionise, the entire approach to Scottish football from SFA, from the SPFL, from the police in particular, who I think out of all the various stakeholders over the last number of months have been highlighted as being totally inadequate, clearly underfunded by a government who clearly, from an outsider looking in, wants to deploy thousands of millions of pounds into all sorts of pet projects which have absolutely no positive impact on anyone's life, daily life in Scotland. And I think now, really, we simply cannot accept this any longer. And I think until, in particular, and how many times this season have we talked about refereeing, talked about guys who are doing a day job and are turning up in huge pressurised situations, which is costing millions of pounds. Let's not underestimate how much this costs. And, we simply cannot accept it anymore. And in a way, and this sounds slightly childish, but I'm actually glad to see how much it's impacted upon another club, because, the amount of times when I was at the club where, everyone was given the job, the ring round other clubs, and look, there's a vote going this way, let's get people on side. I mean, you'll recall Billy Bowie actually going on TV to have a rant about how much of a shambles Scottish football was, but at the end of it all, voting to maintain the status quo. So, in a way, guys, we've only ourselves to blame. And at some stage, are you going to continue to tolerate this, or are you actually going to say enough's enough? And I think if there was any way in a short term to endear yourself to the fan base, the likes of Jim Gillespie, Jim Gillespie should put the Kevlar jacket on, and stand up and say, we are at war. And I know that sounds like an extremely sort of like maybe strange thing to say, but this does not happen by accident. This is years upon years of people digging in, getting their tentacles of influence into all sorts of various parts of our game, both on and off the field. And now, I mean, we are where we are, and the wider world is seeing it, because this has been going on for, quite frankly, generations, David.
Yeah, I had a rant about this last week that that got picked up and put about, but I stand by it, because this is the thing, that it's not going to change overnight, because it didn't arrive overnight. This is not a new thing, as you say, and it's not something that arrived by accident or happenstance. It's something that was crafted and worked on by Celtic. And when Celtic fans, whenever they get really defensive about it, I'm always like, guys, you worked really hard for this. Give a bit of credit to the people at your club who did this, rather than you should be happy about it. Like, it's just got you a league title, for Christ's sake. So I never quite understand. But as you say, they simultaneously want to be the top dogs and the victims at the same time. So, that might explain the double think. I think what was interesting was the fact that this has now gone worldwide, but certainly nationwide in the UK. I mean, I was watching Manchester United, Nottingham Forest, and after a dodgy decision, the Forest fans started singing, "Are you Celtic in disguise?" And big betting firms putting out tweets saying, "Oh, you're not getting a penalty for that during games unless you're wearing green and white hoops." So it's become a thing where everybody has noticed it. And I think that Celtic are now as despised as, well, we despise them, really, nationwide. And I think that does give people like Cavenagh, Gillespie, Tony Bloom, etc. I think it does give them an in. It does give them the opportunity that people are more receptive to it now. With us, it was always a case, whenever we said it, people just went, it's both of you. It's not just Celtic. You're just saying that because, they're winning and you're not. And as I always said, we've won the league. Well, now we've won the league once in 15 years. They've won it 14 times. Right. If it's both of us, then we are spectacularly fucking unlucky here, statistically. And I think that people are noticing it. It doesn't go for us in the same way. Does that mean we don't occasionally get a decision? Of course it does, right? Of course we get a decision from time to time. Does it mean we get plenty against us? Absolutely. The statement from the SFA last week was hilarious. The John Beaton. Yeah, everybody condemns the fact that he had to go into, call the police about what he got after that decision. Equally, I don't remember the same storm when he had to do it in 2019 when Celtic went after him. The funniest thing about that is Chris Sutton on the Sky coverage saying that he had a good game the next day in the column after something has changed. He says, actually, no, he had a terrible game, brother Beaton. And you know what that is? That's when a concerted attempt comes out to change the narrative. And for the SFA to lambast everybody rather than looking at the key problem, I think is endemic. It was an English journalist who said the reason the SFA are doing this is an organisation that hate any scrutiny, and now they're under a lot of scrutiny. I've banged on about referees. I've banged on about, for me, rather than just complaining about it, I've said, why don't we look at full-time refs, training people? I will never, ever be persuaded that people doing something full-time every day of the week, working on it, training on it, will be better than people doing it as a hobby. I can't remember too many sports people who come off a shift and won the Premier League title, for example. It means you can have one-off good games, as we know, but you can't do it permanently. So I've always been in favour of that. The VAR that we have up here is awful, god-awful. And It simply doesn't work the way that it's supposed to, and therefore it makes everything worse. The angles that get shown. Rangers conceded at the weekend, refereeing. Rangers scored a goal through Yusuf Chermiti where the lines were, I was like, really? And I was delighted because it went in. It went for us for once. But then we conceded a penalty through VAR that was never a penalty in a billion years. And that's despite them looking at it, because they don't have angles. Everything that comes up on that VAR screen looks as though it was filmed by a potato. It's amateur. We are trying to make Hollywood movies with a Nokia 3310. It isn't possible to do it. So we should be scrapping VAR or getting the full whack. Either pay for it or don't bother with it. This halfway house isn't helping anybody. Get full-time refs in. But then we do need to challenge the culture of, why are the refs so compromised? Why are refs incapable of giving big decisions against Celtic? And this is something that I think is because referees are allowed to be totally silent, which I've never agreed with. But they are allowed to be totally silent, not to do interviews. It should be put to referees. That's why if you got an independent, a person from abroad coming in, and why do these decisions keep happening? What's the truth? And the truth, I suspect, is we're fucking terrified because we know that if we do that, we're getting weeks and weeks and weeks of hassle and abuse. And so we just, it's easier not to do it. Because some of the decisions are just so far from justifiable, David, that they let the cat out the bag on Wednesday. And I don't think it's going to go in anytime soon. But, yep, it wasn't anything we didn't know, I think it's fair to say.
Let me give you an anecdote here, listeners. One of the sort of jobs that I would have done when I was at the club, well, obviously Inside Ibrox is or Away Days is the kind of weekly 7:00 show. Great bit of footage, great content. So we would have obviously edited it in terms of various things that could have potentially caused us issues. And I remember during Armed Forces Day, there was possibly a helicopter involved, or certainly there was an abseil off the roof, and essentially then the ball was presented to the ref. So basically then, obviously this sort of narrative had come out about Nick Walsh's place of work, and Nick Walsh received the ball from the ref. The ref received the ball from the soldier, and he smiled. He was like, "Thanks very much." He might even high-fived him. All the most innocent of innocent, thanks for the ball. And these balls, as you'll see in Europe, are brought out on remote control cars. They're brought by little kids, all sorts, celebrities bring them out, hand the balls. One of the kind of tiny ceremonies, you're going to call it that, of modern day football. And we cut that. And the reason that I cut it was because I was like, that'll be clipped and that'll be put in the social media where, look at Nick Walsh basically being happy. The same with David Dickinson, where I think we scored, Philip Clement was the manager, and Dickinson, I think, smiled, or probably was doctored that he looked delighted that Rangers had scored.
Yeah,
and
it was doctored. Yeah, it was doctored.
Yeah, no. But again, though, this is maybe people say, well, I was part of the problem because I kind of sort of shirked away from what was a completely sort of innocent point of view. But I think, David, what we've got to remember here and remind ourselves, and you're entirely right. You take the Irish League for a second, and the four teams that were top of the Irish League this year had one thing in common: they were full-time professional teams. And the science behind that is, of course, over 38 games. The full-time teams should be better, because maybe they've signed technically better players and spent more money, but because they are training more often in better environments and they are resting accordingly. But I think, David, the same goes for referees, and I think, for me, and I don't want to get back in my soapbox, but ultimately, power and accountability are meant to be inseparable. But the issue we've got here is that the people with most influence inside organisations are the people who are most insulated from scrutiny. Now, whether that be politics, football, civic life, structures which are designed to protect the integrity of institutions like the SFA, the SPFL, and others gradually evolve into essentially systems that protect individuals instead. And that's where we're at, where when something goes wrong, which it did the other night, instead of coming out and saying, we've got this wrong, let's see how we can fix it, the first thing's to go back and basically blame a manager who is within touching distance, who's got a hand in the league title, the first non-Old Firm league title in a generation. then we blame the media. I mean, quite frankly, the fact it actually ends up becoming Rangers' fault in some way or other as the narrative took hold, it's madness. And actually, when you talk it out, it is actually absolute madness. And I think until at times, we people who are going to advocate for us, both from within inside the club and people who are going to advocate on our behalf on a regular basis and say enough is enough, then we're going to be talking about this situation in the future, David.
Yeah, we certainly will be. But yes, well, we will be talking, of course, about various things on Heart and Hand throughout the summer. We'll keep you up to date with everything that happens. We're told by Andrew Cavenagh it's going to be a big summer of change. So to keep up to date with events, you know what to do. You just need to head to patreon.com/heart and hand. That's patreon.com/heart and hand. That will do us. We will be back, so don't think that the shows are going to end. We'll have more shows throughout the summer. My thanks to our producers, Mike Lee and Paul Miles, our sponsors, RYDC and Knob. Check out their new product, Saley. And of course, David Graham. Thank you, David.
Cheers, David. Cheers, listeners. See you all for a new, fresh season. And let's dust ourselves down and remember, we are the people.
Absolutely. We'll have a rest, as pissed off as we all are just now, and then we'll get back in the horse. It's madness, but it's our life. Thank you very much for joining us, folks. We'll talk to you again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye. Heart and Hand is delighted to be sponsored by the Rangers Youth Development Company. John Gregg, Richard Goff, Lorenzo Amoruso and Barry Ferguson, 4 legendary Rangers captains and the faces of Rangers Youth Development Corp's latest lotto campaign. Over 18s can play and weekly prizes are on offer, plus an end-of-the-month jackpot of at least £12,000 in 4-week months and £15,000 in 5-week months. Visit www.rydc.co.uk, that's rydc.co.uk now for full details on all their products, or click the link in the show description to sign up for Rangers Lotto.